counter-terror police have been accused of using a selfie of Jacob Rees-Mogg as evidence linking a civil servant to right-wing extremism. Andrew Hale-Byrne was arrested in October 2020 and the police decided a few months later not to charge him. He says that officers were heavy-handed and aggressive during interviews. I mean, they say a lot more than that, it must be said as well. He says that officers, 14 armed officers, according to him, decided to raid his house. He was recently recovering from a cancer operation, and they did not give him the opportunity to go to the toilet before he was in the back of a police van. They joked about that he should defecate in his own trousers, which unfortunately he then did. He then was denied a shower, kept in a cold police cell, demanded to know which way he voted during the Brexit referendum, and even apparently the wife of his local vicar was contacted to find out what he prayed about. Joining me now is the founder and general secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. I mean, Toby, this is the kind of behaviour that one would imagine warrants a protest on the street, doesn't it?
It is absolutely shocking, Patrick. The counter-terrorism unit went completely over the top in their investigation of Andrew. They were trying to find the person who had leaked something about Kim Darroch, the US ambassador to Washington. He'd made some critical remarks about Donald Trump while in post. Those remarks had been leaked to the press, but the distribution list for the document which had been leaked was 35,000 strong. But for some reason, I think Andrew's theory is that he'd made some enemies in the Department of Trade, which he was then working for. So they gave his name as the suspected leaker to the Metropolitan Police, and the Metropolitan Police sicked the counter-terrorism unit onto him, and they behaved abominably. And the questions they asked him were just unbelievably intrusive, and certainly a breach of his human rights. And I think it's illustrative of a wider problem in the police, Patrick, which is the lack of any training about what our free speech rights are. The Free Speech Union did a survey. We FOI'd all the police forces in England and Wales to find out what sort of free speech training police officers were receiving, because this kind of thing happens again and again. And we discovered that 78%, at least of those who responded to our FOI requests, not all did, 78% of forces were providing no free speech training or absolutely negligible free speech training to their officers. Meanwhile, they get obviously voluminous amounts of EDI training, which is why things like the incident happened a couple of weeks ago in Hebden Bridge, which was the woman being questioned by West Yorkshire Police for having taken a photograph of a sticker on a Hebden Valley Pride poster. They really need to understand why free speech is important and what the legal protections are for free speech. And hopefully, if they did, things like this wouldn't happen nearly so often.
I mean, it's one thing, isn't it? We know that voting for Brexit and wanting to control our borders is the kind of thing that gets your bank account closed, OK? We know that. I didn't think that, essentially having a selfie with Jacob Rees-Mogg could well be used as evidence that you are now a far-right extremist.
It is extraordinary. I mean, you think we'll all be taken into custody?
Well, I've got one on my phone. I'm in grief. How long is it before they're here?
If the bar is that low. I mean, we saw Jacob Rees-Mogg being treated in a similar way in the Prevent report, the report that Sir William Shawcross produced on the Prevent programme, and how it had really lost its way and had stopped investigating Islamic extremism and was focusing entirely on what it perceived to be right-wing extremism. And in an internal report, evidence that you were a right-wing extremist is that you were sympathetic to the views of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who the report described as sympathetic to far-right audiences. Another trigger which showed you were at risk of radicalisation was if you enjoyed the newspaper columns of Douglas Murray, Rod Liddle and Melanie Phillips. I'm amazed I wasn't on the list myself, Patrick. And Suella Braverman in Parliament earlier this week actually condemned the Prevent programme for citing what was mainstream conservative views as evidence of far-right extremism. But these organisations, the police as we know, the Prevent programme, are now so captured by woke ideology that if you're anywhere to the right of Jeremy Corbyn, they think you're in danger of being radicalised and becoming a far-right terrorist.
It's just absolutely bonkers. I mean, we have had in the last day or so quite obvious instances of racism towards an Asian shopkeeper. We've had kind of paramilitary-style activity on the streets of London, of people class themselves as black rights activists. I'm not really sure what the proper definition is here. All that stuff's fine. That's all right, though. That's OK. But, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for goodness sake, I mean, he's the problem in society, isn't he? And if that happens, it's the heavy-handed nature of it, as well as you've just said there, 14 armed officers rocking up at his door, supposedly, and unfortunately him getting into a situation, well, then putting him in a situation where he's deeply uncomfortable, and for whatever health issues that he's got, ends up in a state where he's unfortunately defecating and having to sit in it. I mean, it does appear as though there is an almost excessive focus on, dare I say it, far-right ideology. That said, what they will say, though, is that far-right threats are the fastest-growing threats that MI5 face. So maybe they've got that in the back of their heads when they're knocking someone's door through.
Yeah, but when they come up with that stat, bear in mind that their definition of what a far-right person is someone who enjoys watching Jacob Rees-Mogg on GB News and reads Rod Little's column in The Spectator. So if your definition of a far-right extremist is so unbelievably broad and absurd, then little wonder you conclude that far-right extremism is on the rise. Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And this is why, Toby, just one more with you, I think that we are in the situation we are in as a society where, if you now express a view on stuff like border control, or, you are, quote-unquote, gender critical, or you voted for Brexit, it's very easy now for people to just lob things out there like, you are far right, you are the hard right. That's just rubbish. You're not part of the National Front because you think that we shouldn't necessarily have uncontrolled border situations going. You're not part of the National Front because you thought maybe we are better out of the customs union in the single market.
No, it's a way, I think, of trying to delegitimize anyone who doesn't conform to the bien-pensant opinions of the metropolitan elite. So it's a cluster of supposedly dangerous views which put you at risk of being radicalized. If you oppose 15-minute cities, if you oppose the expansion of ULAs, if you're not completely convinced that we're in the midst of a climate emergency in which everyone is going to be boiled alive within the next few months, if you're opposed to open borders, if you're a Brexiteer, this poor gentleman that was so mistreated by the counter-terrorism police was, as you said at the beginning, asked whether he'd voted for Brexit, as though that would have been evidence of his extreme right-wing sympathies. Let's not forget, 52% of the British population voted for Brexit. Are they all extreme right-wing potential terrorists? I mean, it's extraordinary.
Look, this is again, it's the double standards of society, right? This is a thing that's happened, yeah, and yet we hear so much about like microaggressions or institutional racism in the police force, all of that stuff. I'm not dismissing completely out of hand some people's negative experiences with the police or whatever, but you look at something like this, there's something that's actually happened, and you think, where's the mass outrage to this? But anyway, Toby, thank you very, very much.